Hello and thanks for joining me. This is not my normal video, not the kind of stuff I do normally, but I'm really interested in local history, especially stuff that happened around me, obviously. Now this project I'm doing in this video, it's been on the back burner for about 4 or 5 years, and because of this lockdown thing I've got round to actually bloody doing it. Now all that time ago I was on the internet looking around as you do, and I came across a document, and it was relating to circumstances attending an explosion which occurred in a cartridge press house at the factory of Messrs Kynoch Limited at Worsbrough near Barnsley on the 25th of May 1901. Now that is just, my woods are literally 500 metres that way, this is about a mile away. So it took my attention, and we're talking well over 100 years ago, aren't we? So it really grabbed my attention because I'm into military stuff, because I'm ex-forces, and plus it in my local area, and I've got the actual report from Captain J.H. Thompson, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Explosives. Plus I've got some old maps. And I always wanted to locate the exact location of where this gunpowder mill was actually placed in the area. Now obviously 100 years have passed, so anything, it could be anything, couldn't it? But it was set away, obviously because it's gunpowder, from the village. For obvious reasons, it's bloody gunpowder, isn't it? So it was away from all the industrial stuff, because there was railways and canals, sawmills, quarries and other industries. So they needed the gunpowder works to be away from that, and it was owned by Kynoch's. I think it was owned by somebody else before that, but I'll go into all the boring stuff later. So, but what I have done, using an old 1904 Worsbrough map, Ordnance Survey, the Godfrey editions. If you're in the UK, you'll be familiar with them. They're really good maps, and I actually found reference to it in here, and I found it on the map. Worsbrough Mills, in brackets, powder. So obviously it weren't really highlighted, it's really small print, and it's just down at the bottom there. Don't worry about it, because I'll show you all maps later and that. And we're actually going to go out on the ground and find this thing. Now, using old-fashioned sleuthing and a modern map, I managed to work out certain points that was on the old map and still on the new map. And the main one was the waterworks, and obviously streams, and the old railways, which the old railways has now become the Pennine Way. Sorry, not the Pennine Way, the Trans-Pennine Trail. What walkers and everything use, so that is a fixed point. Plus the waterworks, it's still shown on here. So when we get on the ground, I can work them two out. And what I've done as well, there's known points on both tracks. So again, using old map and compass methods, I took a grid bearing from one known reference point on the track up to the point where I thought this powder works would be located, and then converted it to a magnetic bearing, and we'll see when we get out there. Right, so like I said, this could be a long haul, but so it don't get boring, we're doing this bit. I'll give you the brief introduction. I'll read the first bit of intro, and then we'll get out on the ground and show you. Right, so I'll read it, bear with me. Explosion in cartridge press house at factory number 1 Yorks. Accident number 164, 1901. Right Honourable the Secretary of State for the Home Department. On the circumstances attending an explosion which occurred in the cartridge press house at the factory of Messrs Kynoch Limited at Worsbrough. near Barnsley on the 25th of May 1901 by Captain J.H. Thompson, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Explosives. Blah de blah de blah, crown, beat, stamp, all that. Right, so briefly, Captain Thompson's words: I have held an inquiry into the circumstances attending the explosion which occurred on the 25th of May 1901 in the cartridge press house of the gunpowder factory of Messrs Kynoch Limited, situated at Worsbrough near Barnsley, by which 2 men lost their lives, viz. and Mr Abner Rave, aged 19, and Frederick William Thackeray, aged 26. I also attended the adjourned inquest on the bodies of the deceased, which was held by Mr Harworth, Deputy Coroner at Barnsley on the 11th of June 1901. The factory dates from the year 1849 and has been authorised under the Explosive Act by Continuing Certificate Number 1, dated the 3rd of February 1876. Messrs Kynoch Limited, who are the present occupiers, as the explosives affected only the building in which it occurred, it is not necessary to enter any general description of the factory nor details of the continuing certificate. The building was added to in question in 1883 in virtue of an amending licence granted on the 30th of March that year. This licence authorises its use for making compressed cartridges not containing their own means of ignition, and limits the number of persons to 2 and the quantity of gunpowder to 300 pounds. The building was lightly constructed of wood and was divided into 3 compartments. So we'll go out and have a look, and we'll show you on the ground, and then we'll come back and read the rest of it. So bear with me, put your feet up, make a cup of coffee or tea or whatever, and I hope you enjoy it. If you don't enjoy this kind of stuff, don't watch it, but I think it's interesting. I love this kind of stuff. So right, so I thought I'd get out on the ground and have a look for this gunpowder works. Now, I had a rough idea where it was anyway. Where I'm stood at the minute, the Transpennine Trail, the old railway, is just behind me. In front of me there is a track, and I've taken a bearing, a grid bearing. In fact, that wagon just come out of there. That's it's now water treatment plants, but on the old Godfrey map, sewage works, same thing. So we've got the sewage works just over yonder, we've got the stream just in front of me, it is a stream now, and then the path I need is about 500 metres up that way, following the path. So I took a bearing at home, converted it to a mag bearing, and that's smack on the path I need. It's quite busy with dog walkers and stuff, but there you go, everybody's shut down, aren't they? So let's get on with it then. I'll have a quick pan round of this, show you where I am, and then we'll get off. So up there, that's the way back up to Worsbrough. You cross the Pennine Trail, which is the Dove Valley Trail at this section between Mummel and Worsbrough. The sewage works is just beyond them trees, about 100 yards if that. You've seen the wagon come out, and then I'm going to be heading up that path up there. I can see a path. How overgrown it is, I don't know. Right, let's go and see if we can find the Kynoch Gunpowder Works to further my investigation into Captain Thompson's investigation into the explosion that occurred in 1901. Well, there's the water treatment plant. On the old map it's the sewage works. and I've just come from up that way, and I'm going to continue up this path, and when it goes out of sight it bends to the left, and then I reckon just before that open field, if I find blacker dike around there, that's where the powder works is. I looked on the contours and it's not actually on the hill, so it's at the base of the hill. It'd be, whether I can find any remnants of the old buildings, I don't know. There's several. The one with the actual explosion, that were made of timber, so obviously there's not going to be much left of that. Right, we'll crack on then. Right, so I've come to the end of the path, and this looks about right. It's a junction, and this looks about right because just down there at the end of that little worn track is a bridge, which I'm guessing crosses Blacker Dyke. So in that case, Blacker Dyke was behind the Gunpowder works and in front of where I'm stood now. So it's possibly in this field, or maybe across, but I'm reckoning it's going to be in this field here, in this area here. But obviously well over 100 years ago there's going to be no sign of it, I don't think. We can check, but I reckon I'm in the right spot. Well, I'm going to have a look around the field first, and then we'll have a look down the path. Yeah, I definitely think I'm in the right spot. This corner of the field, I reckon a 300 square metre plot of this corner where I am is where all the buildings were, the old Gunpowder works, because I've got the dyke here just behind me running along there, and that was actually just behind the powder works, and the path to get to it is just at the edge there. So I reckon, definitely reckon it's here. No evidence apart from using the map which says it was here. Obviously this field's been ploughed and ploughed over 100 years, so it'd be interesting to get permission and come with a metal detector, but that's maybe another story. In the distance there you'll see Worsbrough Dale. I'll zoom in for you. Probably just see some. Right, so I've just walked it through there, across the little Blacker Dyke, and this is shown on the map as well, Blacker Pond. So we know we're in the right place. Definitely. Definitely. There's just no evidence of the buildings, which they're not going to be, but it's nice to come and have a look at something you've been researching, isn't it? So this is the dyke, which was at the back of the Gunpowder works. This is the orangey water. A lot of metals in this area in the ground. So definitely, I definitely think that the Gunpowder works was here, in this corner. Definitely. There's about 7 buildings. Easily, yeah. And the path fits right, just at the end of this track here, there's the footpath, and that's clearly shown on the map. So it's definitely here in this corner. Awesome. Shame there's no remains of buildings, but there you go. Yeah, so Messrs Abner and Thackeray, the two unfortunates who eventually died from the explosion, would have walked this track up to the Gunpowder works, just round the bend there, and back home again on an evening, back to the village of Worsbrough, where they resided at 18 West Street, which is still there today as borders. So, walking in history, it's all around us, isn't it? Pretty fascinating. When we get back, if you want to keep watching, we'll talk in more detail of the report where I've got from Captain Thompson. Back off the ground, my head's boiling. It was bloody lovely today actually. So as you've seen, we didn't find any remains of the actual gunpowder factory, which I didn't think we would anyway. But I am definitely thinking that I found the exact location using compass bearings and overlaying the old map onto the new map and seeing existing tracks and features. It's got to be where I said it was in the film we've just been looking at. So maybe it might be worth asking the farmer if he can go around with a metal detector. Put your hands over if he isn't stamped Irish metal detector. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, yeah, I didn't expect to find anything standing there. I thought, you know, after 100 years it could have grown over with woodland, but obviously that exact area, it's been used as a field and ploughed and ploughed and ploughed. Because they had little bits of pottery and all sorts in it, you know, because it's recently been ploughed and there's new saplings coming up. I don't know if it showed it in the video that much. Yeah, it just really got me interested, like I said earlier, because it's in my local area and I'm interested in stuff like that, and there you go. I mean, I didn't expect to find it, but where the actual explosion occurred, there were several buildings, and the manager lived on site with his wife, and I got that from the 1901 census. To be honest, I'll just put my specs on because I did a bit more research. So the manager of Kynoch was, where are we? He actually moved down from Scotland. Powder mill, civil parish, Worsbrough, head of family, Gunpowder Works, John G. Seeley. Yeah, so the manager, John G. Seeley, he was born in Scotland, Argyll. So obviously his family were involved with the Kynoch firm because they originated in Scotland. And obviously was given an outlaying gunpowder mill to manage. And his age, 25. 25-year-old lad running a gunpowder works in the middle of nowhere. Awesome. And he was actually living on site according to this. And he was living with his wife, Carrie. And it says, where born? Cornwall. She was born in Cornwall. And Mary Little, sister-in-law, aged 20, from Cornwall as well. So how Scotland and Cornwall ended up in Yorkshire, it's fascinating bloody history, isn't it? The two lads who died, unfortunately, they were living at 18 West Street, which is still there today, to be honest. I used to live behind West Street in the 70s when I was a kid. There's two streets, Baden and Powell Street, and West Street is the street below that on the main road, and that is still there today, to be honest. They're quite big houses, and back in the industrial age they had a lot of borders, didn't they? So in the census it's come up as Chas Bennett, relation to the family, colliery labourer, Rachel Bennett, Fred William Thackeray, boarder, labourer at Powder Works, unfortunately, aged 25. Unfortunately, this was one of the lads who died. So he's same age as the manager. Then we've got a colliery clerk, George Jazz Sanderson, and then there were poor soul who died, Abner Rafe, poor bugger, aged 19, a boarder at 18 West Street again. And he was actually born in Munwell, which is just the other side. So like, where the Powder Works is, you've got Worsbrough at one side, a village, through the woods, then Munwell. So they're not too far apart, but he ended up obviously getting digs with his mate at the Gunpowder Works, because it was an easy walk. It was an easy walk up there. The phone's ringing, I'm not going to answer it because we're carrying on with this. So yeah, so that confirms where they lived in the 1901 census. So Kynoch, they're quite famous gunpowder works, aren't they? Quite famous name of cartridges, Kynoch. Still going today, aren't they? So at that time of that year what cartridges they were making. I'm not really sure. Was it Boer War era? Was it just before? Just before World War One, wasn't it? So 150 grain. Shotgun cartridges maybe as well. But there you go. So basically then, what I'm looking at, what got me into it, we're getting this thing, an actual document by the Inspector of Explosives and his report, and we've done the on the ground bit, and if you want to stick with it, I'll read the rest of it to you and try and explain a little bit as we go along. So like we said, Captain J.H. Thompson, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Explosives, did the report. I have the honour to report that I have held an inquiry into the circumstances attending the explosion which occurred on the 20th of May 1901 in the cartridge press house of the gunpowder factories of Messrs Kynoch Limited, situated at Worsbrough near Barnsley. 2 men lost their lives: Abner Rafe, aged 19, Frederick William Thacker, aged 26. I also attended the adjourned inquest 11th of June at Barnsley, and we did that little bit before on. Right, so we're going to the next bit, what we hadn't looked at. The building was lightly constructed of wood and was divided into 3 compartments. The first of these formerly used for compressing gunpowder. Gunpowder pellets for small arms, but has not been in use for some time. The second compartment contained a steam engine for working the presses, and the third, in which the explosion occurred, containing a cam press. So you've got to think back that at this time a small steam engine was used in the process of working the cams in the presses, yeah? So imagine a small steam engine in basically a shed, a big shed. right, so the press had only been installed during the present year, 1901. It was purchased from the Royal Gunpowder Factory at Waltham Abbey and had been converted from a prism press so as to be suitable for pressing blasting cartridges. Photographs of the machine are reproduced in the first report of the committee appointed to inquire into the accident, the 13th of December 1893 at the Royal Gunpowder Factory, Waltham Abbey, where also a description of the press will be found. Briefly, the action of the machine is as follows. A hopper situated at the back of the machine is filled up with gunpowder in the form of grain. At the base of the hopper are 6 circular holes opening onto a sliding plate, which is moved backwards and forwards by the action of a cam, weighted lever under the machine. This charging plate is perforated by 6 holes corresponding to openings in the hopper, and each of a size to contain the required charge. The travel of the plate brings the perforations under the openings in the hopper, so that the charges of powder fall into them, being prevented from escaping below the matrix table over which the charging plate slides. So it's sorting the gunpowder pellets and they're dropping through, yeah? The latter then moves forward until the perforations over the matrices or dies in which the compression takes place, and each cartridge of powder thereupon falls upon its respective matrix. Above and below the matrices are 2 massive crossheads, each carrying 6 plungers, which are made to travel up and down between vertical guides by means of cranks. If I could find an old diagram of this, I'd show it you, but I'm just describing it. The motion of these crossheads is so adjusted that as soon as the charging plate charges, when the compression is completed, the upper plungers are withdrawn and the lower ones continue to rise until the cartridge has been driven out of the matrix. The lower plungers carry the pins which form the perforation through the axis of each cartridge. The machine is started and stopped by means of a square tooth positive clutch, Yeah, so it's on the steam engine. The steam engine could be running. Once they hit the clutch, it's on, it's going. When the clutch is thrown into gear, it forces the heavy moving parts of the machine to take up suddenly, like I just said. So it was whap. Yeah, it will be necessary to discuss the action of this part of the mechanism more fully below. Bear with me. The working of the machine was not on the whole satisfactory, and it had required so much supervision and adjustment that the manager of the factory had, for some weeks previous to the accident, spent a large proportion of his time in this building. So he knew there were problems with it, the manager, and he were in there all the time trying to sort things out. Okay? The difficulties are said, however, to have been overcome, and the men employed at the machine reported that it was working well on the day previous to the accident. That this was not strictly the case is shown by an examination of the machine after the accident, from which it appears that 6 of the plungers had been removed and another had been put out of action by stopping the feed. The press as a whole can hardly therefore be said to have been working well. And I think Captain he'd been there before and mentioned something to the manager, but hang on. On the morning of the accident, the foreman and the 2 deceased proceeded to the cartridge press house at about 8:20 AM, taking with them about 150 pounds of gunpowder in 2 barrels, which they placed on the floor of the press compartment in front of the press. This was the usual place in which the grain powder was deposited, and was the most convenient position for replenishing the hopper of the machine. The foreman then left, and then the men proceeded to prepare for the day's work. For this purpose it would be usual to commence by thoroughly oiling the plungers and other parts of the press. There are many indications that this is what actually going on at the moment when the explosion occurred. The interval between the time when the foreman left the building and the occurrence of the accident was about 10 minutes, which would not be excessive time for operation or preparing the machine for work. The hopper contained no powder, and there was no indication of the explosion of compressed cartridges at the back of the press. The trays in which these are being placed have been thrown down in a heap without being blackened or ignited. The weighted lever which works by the charging plate had been propped up so as to put this part of the mechanism out of action. Strange. The engine was running at the time, saying engine, steam engine, but the clutch had been withdrawn so as to bring the machine to rest. The oil can, which when not in use is kept in the engine compartment, was found amongst the debris at the foot of the mound close to one of the shoes of the deceased man, Rafe, and at the point where he escaped up the bank. This makes it appear probable that the oil can was actually in his hand at the moment of the explosion. All these indications point to the fact that the actual work had not commenced when the accident occurred, and it may be said with certainty that the powder was not being pressed at the time. So the inspector never found, he wasn't there and didn't see the bodies, but the manager saw the bodies, and they didn't die on scene, but they managed to get away from the building. The explosion occurred at about 8:30 AM. It was of so mild a character that several persons working in the factory heard no sound. Now, bearing in mind, the cartridge press was a shed away from the other buildings, so there's noisy stuff going around, so yeah, maybe they didn't hear it. The manager heard the sound, he must have been out and about, and describes it as having resembled the noise of tearing rather than a report of an explosion. So you know, like a like a delayed explosion rather than a boom, and that's how the manager described it. The effects on the building also show that it was a case of rather of a rapid combustion of powder than of a violent explosion. The light walls and roof were thrown down without being shattered. The partition between the press compartment and the engine was blown down, but the further compartment sustained no material damage. Neither the press nor the steam engine was injured because they're obviously heavy metals, and the latter continued to run after the incident occurred. No damage was done to other buildings of the factory, nor was debris projected to any considerable distance. The mildness of the explosion may be accounted for by a considerable percentage of moisture contained in the powder at this stage of manufacture, and by the fact that it was unconfined. In this connection, it is interesting to recall an experiment carried out after an accident at Waltham Abbey in 1893 and detailed in the above mentioned report. This experiment showed that with capital letters E.X.E powder, the explosion of a barrel of grain was only moderately violent when ignition took place at the top, whereas the powder was ignited at the bottom of the barrel and the explosion was extremely violent. The floor at the back of the press compartment was considerably charred, whereas in the front it was scarcely even blackened. At first sight it would appear from this that the bulk of the powder was at the back of the building, but after careful examination, Major Toms, I came to the conclusion that this was not the case and that the floor at the back had taken fire damage because it was more impregnated with powder dust. Now this has got me thinking, the gunpowder dust, I don't know, you get my thinking, the dust in the air. Here we go, I came to It is curious that the lining of the walls and roof showed scarcely any sign of blackening from the explosion. The two deceased were able to escape from the building without assistance, but succumbed afterwards to the effects of burning and shock. Poor buggers. So this has gone off, boom, the shock of the explosion, they've got burns, nobody's heard it apart from the manager. They've managed to get out of the building, it's on a timber building, they've got away. Still unfortunately died of their injuries. Terrible. There you go. It is regretted that I had no opportunity of questioning the deceased, who were conscious for some time after the accident. Rafe stated to the manager that he was propping the feed lever, while Thackeray, when asked what he was doing, said that he was pulling the lever of the clutch. These statements are perfectly in accord with the evidence afforded by an inspection of the machine and debris. There can be little doubt that Rafe, having finished propping up the lever, gave the order to Thackeray to stop the machine, which the latter immediately did by throwing out the clutch, and at the instant of ignition occurred. The cause must therefore be sought in the action of the clutch, and as no other source of ignition offers any reasonable degree of probability, although no powder had been put in the machine, it is not improbable that in the process of cleaning and preparing for work, dust, again, and grains may have fallen in or near the clutch. Dusty environment, spark, boom. That's my thinking. But here we go. Probably no powder being put in the machine is probably cleaning and may fall. And if the lever was slowly withdrawn, the square corners of the clutch would grind over each other, producing local heating and even possibly a spark. So I think that's, you've got the dust and then the teeth of the clutch and he's just said that could have caused a spark. Boom, that's what's caused. Not a full explosion, but I don't know, an aerial explosion, if you like. But he's not specific in stating that. I consider this quite sufficient to account for the ignition. It is necessary, however, to mention a further statement by Rafe when in hospital, to the effect that he saw the first ignition near number 6 punch, and that they had made 6 trays of cartridge previous to the explosion. As the latter part of the statement could not be true, and owing to the short time which had elapsed since the commenced work, and as the deceased was wondering in his mind somewhat at that time, I do not consider much weight to be added to it. So basically he's saying this Rafe's further statement, he weren't conscious, he was dying, and there you go. Then he goes on to say, at my suggestion, the company, Kynoch, have decided to abandon the use of this form of press and to revert to the simpler and, in my opinion, safer form which was previously in use in this building. Excuse me. In the majority of private factories, the pressing of blasting cartridges is carried out in a hydraulic press, having a large number of plungers. These presses may cost somewhat more to install, but taking into account the frequent delays and repairs necessary with the government form of cam presses, there can be little doubt that not only must the output be greater with the hydraulic machine, but the cost of upkeep and working must be less. The above mentioned report was far from favourable to the cam press. So again, as with anything, they're saving money, aren't they? Trying to save money, but it costs 2 lives, doesn't it, at this point? The above mentioned report was far from favourable to the cam press, and though the incident of 1893 was not definitely due to this, on the occasion of my last inspection of the Worsbrough factory, the one we're talking of, on the 12th of March 1901, I spent some time examining the cam press and recorded in my notes that the machine was not working at all well. I specially took exemption to the action of the clutch and left an instruction that this latter should be used as little as possible, since the speed of the machine was reduced and an order was given that only the more experienced man, Rafe, should use the clutch. But no definite order was given by the manager, Seeley, as to limiting the use of the clutch to cases of emergency. Question of blame. The responsibility for the safety of all machinery adopted in the factory for explosives must always rest with the occupiers. In the extreme case of a machine presenting an obvious and acting danger, HM inspectors would exercise their power of prohibiting further use. In the present instance, no such obvious danger was apparent. No blame can be attributed to the company for adopting a machine which was known to have been in use for many years at the Royal Gunpowder factory, nor does any blame attach to the manager or employees in respect of this accident. It is a matter of regret, however, that my instruction in regard to limiting the use of the clutch, indefinite though it admittedly was, should not have led to the manager to issue a clear and precise order on the subject as I had intended. And then it goes on. In conclusion, I may say that I received every possible assistance in my inquiry from the company and from their manager. The coroner's jury returned a verdict of accidental death. I have the honour, sir, your obedient servant, J.H. Thompson, Captain, H.M. Chief Inspector of Explosives. So there we go. So it gets back to the social thing again, doesn't it? Trying to save money and making more production. We've always had that, haven't we? unfortunately led to 2 people's deaths. And I only thought that were interesting. I did. It's just been on my back burner, and it's just one for me really. If you liked it, brilliant. I enjoyed researching into that, and it was a shame I couldn't find any, foundations or anything. But I really enjoyed that, looking for that. It's just something personal to me, and if you enjoyed it, I hope you did. And thanks for joining me. Cheers.